The captain fell first. One moment he was speaking calmly over the intercom about light turbulence ahead. The next his voice cut off mid-sentence. A heavy thud came through the cockpit door. Passengers looked up, confused. Some laughed nervously. Then the first officer didn't answer my call. I stood outside the cockpit with my hand frozen near the keypad, while 147 people watched me. They were waiting for instructions.
For certainty.
Inside, both pilots were on the floor. No one moved to help. No one spoke. At 35,000 feet, silence feels louder than screaming. Training teaches you to move before fear settles in. I unlocked the cockpit with shaking fingers. The captain was slumped against the instrument panel. The first officer lay half-turned in his seat, headset crooked, eyes closed. The autopilot was engaged. Altitude steady. Heading steady. The sky outside looked calm, almost kind. I checked for pulses because that is what the checklist says. My hands felt too small for the moment. The captain's pulse was faint. The first officer's breathing was shallow and wrong. I called for medical assistance over the intercom, keeping my voice level. Years of service had trained that tone into me. 2 passengers responded, a nurse and a paramedic. They worked in tight silence behind the cockpit door while I stood in the aisle blocking curious eyes. We contacted air traffic control. I explained slowly. Both pilots incapacitated. Autopilot engaged. Need immediate assistance. There was a pause on the frequency. Then calm instructions began, measured and precise. They asked if anyone on board had flight experience. I stepped into the aisle. Every face turned toward me. If anyone has flight training, please press your call button. For a second, nothing happened. A baby cried somewhere near row 20. A man removed his headphones. A woman gripped the armrest as if turbulence had begun. Then halfway down the cabin, one small hand rose. Not a hesitant lift. A clear one. Row 18A. I walked toward her slowly. She looked about 11. Brown hair pulled into a low ponytail. Knees not quite reaching the floor from the seat. A paperback book face down on her tray table. Traveling alone tag, still looped around her wrist. My name is Flora Daniels, she said before I could ask. Her voice did not shake. I fly simulators with my dad. He's a flight instructor. The cabin had gone so quiet, I could hear the engines hum through the fuselage. Adults stared at her. Some with hope. Some with disbelief. One man began to protest, but stopped when he saw my face. I did not have space for his doubt. How much simulator time? I asked.
Hundreds of hours, she said.
Mostly Boeing. This one's a 737, right?
It was.
Air traffic control was still in my ear, waiting. I made a decision that did not feel like a decision. It felt like gravity. I guided Flora to the cockpit. The paramedic looked at me as if I had lost my mind. I held his gaze for half a second, long enough to say, without words, that we had no alternative. Flora climbed into the first officer's seat. Her feet barely touched the rudder pedals. She adjusted the headset with careful hands. Center, we have someone with simulator experience, I said. How old? The controller asked. I looked at her profile.
Calm.
Focused. 11, I answered. Silence again. Shorter this time. Copy, the controller said. Maintain present heading. We'll talk her through it. Flora's fingers hovered over the controls, but did not grab. She looked at the instruments like someone greeting old friends. I know the layout, she murmured. Just tell me what you need. Behind us, the cabin waited. 147 lives balanced on systems and a child's memory of digital skies. I closed the cockpit door and took the jump seat. For the first time in 10 years of flying, I was not serving drinks or calming nerves. I was watching a girl study an aircraft over the Rockies while 2 grown men lay unconscious behind her. I did not feel panic. I felt the weight of witness. The autopilot held steady, but the sky outside was not as empty as it looked. Air traffic control began speaking in careful steps. Headings. Altitude checks. Fuel calculations. Their voices were calm in the way people sound when they are working very hard not to imagine the worst. Flora listened without interrupting. She repeated each instruction before touching anything. Her hands were small on the controls, but precise. She adjusted our heading 3 degrees west. The aircraft responded smoothly. Behind us, the cabin crew moved quietly through the aisle. I could hear them explaining in low tones that we were diverting. No one mentioned the pilots again. Passengers understand more from silence than from words. Flora, the controller said, we're routing you toward Denver. Weather is clear. Long runways. Emergency crews standing by. Copy, she replied. Her feet strained against the pedals. I slid a cushion behind her back so she could reach more comfortably. She did not thank me. She was too focused. At 35,000 feet, small mistakes grow large quickly. A slight overcorrection. A missed call-out. But she treated the cockpit like a classroom. Slow movements. No rushing. How's fuel? She asked. The question made the controller pause, then answer. She was thinking ahead. I glanced at the captain and first officer. The paramedic was still working. Oxygen mask secured. For started. Their faces were pale under the cockpit lights. I had flown with the captain for 3 years. He once told me he trusted the autopilot more than most co-pilots. Today, the autopilot was trusting an 11-year-old. The descent began gradually. Air traffic control talked her through each step. Reduce speed. Lower altitude. Adjust trim. The aircraft dipped slightly at one point. A soft ripple of gasps traveled through the cabin. I felt it more than heard it. Easy, Flora whispered to herself, correcting gently. She asked for flap settings before they were mentioned. She monitored airspeed like it was a heartbeat. Her breathing stayed even. Mine did not. I realized then that this was not luck. This was not a child playing pilot. This was preparation meeting a moment no one expected. As we dropped below 10,000 feet, the city appeared in the distance. A wide stretch of runway waited under bright afternoon light. Fire trucks lined the edges like silent witnesses. Flora, the controller said, voice softer now. You're doing very well. Let's focus on lining up. She nodded, though they could not see her. The runway centered slowly in the windshield. Wind steady. Approach stable. I placed my hands flat on my knees so she would not see them tremble. 147 people sat behind us. Some praying. Some holding strangers' hands. Some staring at seatbacks in disbelief. In the cockpit, there was only a child and a machine. And the thin, quiet space between falling and landing. At 500 feet, the world narrowed. The runway filled the windshield. The fire trucks were no longer distant shapes, but bright red lines waiting on either side. The engines hummed with a steady, low promise. Maintain glide path, the controller said. You're centered. Flora's jaw tightened, just slightly. She adjusted the yoke with careful pressure. Not pulling, not pushing. Listening to the aircraft. The wind nudged us once from the left. The plane drifted half a breath off center. She corrected without overthinking it. Speed good, the controller said. Prepare for flare. I watched her eyes move from instruments to horizon and back again. She had practiced this in a room somewhere on a screen with plastic controls. But this was not a simulation. There was no reset button here. No instructor to pause the lesson. At 50 feet, the ground seemed to rush up faster than expected. I felt my chest tighten. Flare now. She pulled back gently. For a second, we floated. Then the main wheels touched the runway with a firm, solid thud. Not soft. Not perfect. But real. The aircraft bounced once, light but noticeable. A ripple of sound moved through the cabin behind us. Hold it steady, the controller said quickly. Flora adjusted again, keeping us straight. The nose lowered. The second set of wheels met the ground. We were down. Deploy reversers, the controller instructed. She reached for the levers, hands steady, and pulled. The engines roared louder, pushing against our forward motion. The runway lines sped beneath us, then slowed. I felt the deceleration press me into the jump seat. My eyes stung, but I did not blink. Manual braking, came the next instruction. Her feet pressed down. The aircraft shuddered slightly, then settled into a controlled roll. The speed dropped. 70 knots.
40. 20.
We came to a complete stop surrounded by flashing lights. For a moment, no one moved. No cheering. No applause. Just the sound of engines winding down and distant sirens approaching. Flora kept her hands on the controls, as if the plane might decide to leave again. "Center," she said softly into the headset. "We're stopped." There was a pause on the frequency. Then the controller exhaled audibly. "Copy that. You did it." The cockpit door opened to a wall of flashing lights. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft before the engines fully powered down. I stood on unsteady legs and guided Flora's hands away from the controls. "It's over," I told her quietly. Only then did she lean back. Medical teams rushed in for the captain and first officer. They were lifted out on stretchers, oxygen masks still secured. I stepped aside as they passed. There would be reports later. Explanations. Investigations. For now, survival was enough. In the cabin, passengers remained seated at first. The silence held for a few long seconds. Then someone began to clap. It spread slowly, not wild or loud, but steady. People were crying. Some bowed their heads. Others simply stared toward the cockpit as if trying to understand what had just happened. Flora looked overwhelmed for the first time. "I just followed instructions," she said to me. I nodded. "You listened." When we finally escorted her out of the aircraft, cameras were already gathering beyond the emergency line. Airport officials. News crews. Questions forming before facts. I kept my hand lightly at her back, shielding her from the rush. She was still wearing the unaccompanied minor tag on her wrist. Her father arrived within the hour. I watched from a distance as he knelt in front of her, hands on her shoulders, searching her face for any sign of fear. She spoke calmly, describing flap settings and glide paths as if recounting a school project. He held her tightly after that. In the days that followed, there were interviews and headlines. Experts debated regulations. Analysts replayed cockpit audio. The airline conducted reviews, implemented new medical protocols, revised contingency training. The captain recovered. The first officer did too. Both reached out later, voices heavy with gratitude and disbelief. But what stayed with me was not the applause or the coverage. It was the stillness in that cockpit at 35,000 feet. The moment when adults waited and a child stepped forward without drama. I have flown thousands of hours since that day. Turbulence still comes. Systems still fail. People still look to the front of the plane for answers. And sometimes, when the cabin grows quiet, I remember a small hand rising in row 18A. Not out of bravery,